let me set you the scene. It's the final week of the college football playoff rankings, and it's conference championship week. Alabama is playing Georgia in the SEC, Indiana and Ohio State in the Big Ten, Texas Tech and BYU in the Big 12, and Virginia and Duke in the ACC, along with a few other smaller schools like North Texas versus Tulane and James Madison in the Sun Belt. One team that is left up in the air is Notre Dame and Miami. Now, Miami beat Notre Dame in week 1, 27-24. They were up by 14 in the fourth quarter. Notre Dame came back. Miami had to get a field goal and a stop to win the game. From there, the two teams had similar kinds of seasons, though there were a few things that separated them overall. But what ended up happening is that Alabama hopped Notre Dame after beating Auburn by one score, really. Meanwhile, Notre Dame trashed Stanford in their final week, and Alabama hopped Notre Dame off the preface of having a 17-point lead against Auburn at halftime and having a really impressive fourth down. I'm saying this in sarcasm, by the way. What ended up happening is you have all these experts on ESPN talking about, well, all Alabama has to do is win or lose, but if they get absolutely blown out, they ought to drop a spot, maybe two. Well, the latter is what happened. Alabama lost 28-7, putting up only one touchdown in the fourth quarter. Georgia trashed them. BYU, early on in the day, lost similarly 7-34 against Texas Tech, who would ultimately make the number 4 spot. Ohio State loses and drops a spot. Virginia loses and drops a spot. SMU, the year prior, dropped 2 spots after losing by just 3 points. You also had BYU, who lost by more than 3 scores, drop a spot. Alabama loses by 21 points and may be the first team in conference championship to lose by that much and didn't drop a single spot. BYU happened to drop. Notre Dame and Miami rubbed up against each other, and they used a head-to-head to put Miami over Notre Dame. Notre Dame misses out because of 2 extra auto bids, and it was arguably the worst decision I've ever seen a committee make, and it had me thinking for a long time. This video has been festering for over 3 months. It's been that long I've been thinking about making a video like this. The CFP needs to change, because if you ever wanted to see biasy or rigged in any selection, you could look no further than that moment. And everybody likes to say, well, Notre Dame lost 2 games. Alabama lost 2 games. And they say, well, Alabama had a great strength of schedule. Notre Dame lost to 2 great teams. Alabama lost to Florida State the same week Notre Dame barely lost to Miami. So in today's episode, we are going to be reworking the College Football Playoff Committee. I know that was an extremely long intro, and I'm sorry, but you had to set the scene in order to get to where we're at right now. And the College Football Playoff Committee, right now, it's a joke. They don't really hold their rules. They try to make statements without making statements. They come up with these ridiculous things that put Alabama ahead of Notre Dame. We all know that being up 17 points and then losing that lead is not impressive, and it's not a good sign. That right there already bothered me. The fact that they didn't drop a spot after getting humiliated was the biggest embarrassment the CFP could have done. It just makes them look bad. We're going to rework the CFP today. So thank you guys so much for sticking with me through that intro. We're going to get into this. And before we do, I want to thank you for all the support on all the shorts and the first episode. Thank you guys so much for supporting me so far. I'm looking to get better at this. I'm looking to get better at YouTube and all of this. I can't wait for some of the next episodes. We're going to really start touching into the NFL. And then, of course, we got a FIFA video coming up in the future. So I hope you guys are excited for that. Let's get into fixing the CFP right now. So I can easily just make this ultimate argument that the CFP should be reverted back to the BCS. So my thing is, I like the playoff format. I do like that competition. I just think when you put people in charge of making unbiased decisions, where there's money and human beings in the process, is almost guaranteed to not happen. And we've seen it over the years. A lot of people have argued the Florida State being left out despite having an undefeated season, and that wouldn't have happened in this playoff format because of the auto bids, which I think are an issue. And then you have, of course, Alabama talking about how they should have been in over SMU in 2024, and then Notre Dame talking about how they should have been over Miami and Alabama in this following year. I just say they should have been over Alabama. Miami could have it, for sure. So there's so much biasy. There is so much poor decisions made on rules that a lot of people cannot hold up. And turning to the BCS would mean that an AI system or some computer generated system would be tracking everything, be tracking all the rules the CFP committee has to follow themselves, and they would base it off of those rules and really stick very hard with that without allowing any outside forces to influence a decision. And that would be the easy logical choice, and I could just end the video here. But let's say that the BCS system is never to return, that computer generated system, even though I think it should. We're gonna have to rework the CFP. And we're gonna go through a couple steps of how to do that. I know a lot of people have their opinions. This is an opinionated video, so if you try to take it as hold fact, I'm sorry, don't get mad at me. Take a listen. There's some things I'm trying to prove, because there's two goals that I am trying to do right now. Goal number 1, remove biasy. Goal number 2, remove illegitimacy. You want to have the most competitive playoffs possible, but you also say you want the little dog to be in at the same time. And you can get one or the other, but you can't have both, and that's already been proven these last 2 playoffs. Boise State losing to Penn State, you had Arizona State, albeit it was a very close game, lost to Texas. You've had Tulane and James Madison, and so it's just obvious that even if you try to force the small dog to come in and potentially do some crazy upset, that is very rare. And you also can't say that I want every single game to be competitive, because if that was the case, you would just put the top 12 teams in, and that seems very logical, but I just think that there's still a problem with that. Let's get to the rules and how I would switch up the college football playoffs. Number 1, we're going to change the format. I believe that there should be 16 teams. Now, I just read a comment on one of my TikToks that says the more you expand the team, the more it actually becomes worse. And in a way, I can kind of understand that. But the reason why I'm expanding the playoffs is because I'm wanting to get rid of autobids. You want the small dog in, let them earn it. Let them get into the top 16, and then they can make their case of being in the playoffs. But I'm not going to give out an auto bid to a team that is ranked in the 20s, maybe even just barely in the top 25 in general, knowing that when they go up against an Oregon or an Ole Miss, they're just going to get crushed. And that's what happened. Tulane got crushed. James Madison scored a lot of points in that 4th quarter, but overall, that whole game, they got crushed. And that is just the problem. You can't have both ways. So I'll increase the teams to 16, but we're getting rid of auto bids. And in the process, since there are 16 teams, that means you're going to have 8 matchups immediately. You're going to have 0 bye weeks, which might actually be good for some teams, because the overall record for teams who have bye weeks since we started this 12-team format is 1-7, with Indiana beating Alabama as the only one team to ever receive a bye to get a victory in the playoffs. So with that format, we are kind of giving it to the people who want a 16-team playoff format, and you would have seen Notre Dame, BYU, Texas, and Vanderbilt, teams that they believe should have been in over the auto bid teams, or maybe even Miami or Alabama, even though Miami definitely deserves it. They got to the championship game, so they're going to be left off the hook. But I'm not done with you, Alabama, because you were frauds, and you know it. So that's the overall structure of the CFP that I want. 16 teams, no auto bids, no buys. There's still a few other factors I want to take care of, and one of the factors I want to actually take care of right now is TV deals, which sounds extremely odd, but I have suspicions when it comes to sports. I believe that things happen that are absolutely rigged just for the sake of entertainment. As a Dallas Mavericks fan, I believe the only reason we got that #1 overall pick to get Cooper Flagg was because we had to force that trade with Luka Doncic, and then we somehow, with a 1% chance, get the first overall pick to get Cooper Flagg. That, to me, is complete stupidity, and anybody who is not superstitious is the only one who's going to fall for it. But even if you have 1% chance of superstition, you would easily see that that was rigged. And there are some other moments that exist too. Most of sports nowadays is entertainment, and in order to get entertainment, cards are going to have to be shuffled. Things are going to have to move around. And to the logical person, it just doesn't make sense. So one of the suspicions I have for the CFP are TV rights deals. Now, we know about the SEC on ESPN, and I just got informed about the ACC also on ESPN. Similarly, the CFP has a deal with ESPN, but not all conferences have those deals in set. Even Notre Dame has their own deal with NBC. So my thing is that we got to switch up deals with TV. I don't believe anybody should have a direct deal with ESPN as long as the CFP exists. So then how would I switch it up? What conferences get what TV deals? I believe every single big conference, Power 4, should get a TV deal, just not directly with ESPN. So this is what I suggest. While the CFP remains on ESPN and Notre Dame is going to remain on NBC because that's been a thing since the 90s, let's start with the ACC. I would love to see the ACC on TNT and TBS. As you can tell, TNT and TBS, they recently just lost their NBA stuff. They're going to, of course, have March Madness, but you also have to remember that they do host playoff games, and they're not directly linked with ESPN. ESPN, which is fine. So I believe that the ACC should have a TNT TBS deal just so they can have some level of sports outside of just hockey there. And when it comes to the Big 12, I would say they should remain on Fox with Gus Johnson and all of them. I mean, that's where most of their games are going to be played. That's where you've seen a majority of the old Red River before that moved over to the SEC. That's where you see some of the big games. That's where the Big 12 championship is on. It would just make sense. For the Big Ten, they should be on NBC and not really on CBS. I think that NBC is a perfect spot. They should actually expand more than just Notre Dame football, more games, like 2 games of Big Ten action plus Notre Dame if they're at home. The only thing that would need to change is that Notre Dame would actually need to start playing football games at their home stadium as early as 11 a.m. Central Time. They really only do their games at like 1:30, 2:30 p.m. Central Time, which I just don't like. I think if you're going to expand the NBC market to more college football, Notre Dame needs to be okay with having a game at 11. That's just me. And then lastly, let's do the SEC. Let's bring it back to CBS. There's too much aura there. The SEC on CBS was a staple for college football. It's a staple for me. I used to watch some of the greatest games I've ever seen when they were on CBS. I just don't believe they need to be on ESPN. As long as the CFP is around, nothing, no outside forces should influence decision making, and money is a big factor in that. And it's very weird how the SEC and the CFP are on the same network. This is just me talking. I don't want to see anybody, not even Notre Dame on ESPN. I don't want to see nobody have a deal as long as the CFP is there. I just don't want to see that kind of biasy. Of course, I'm going to have my biases about Notre Dame, but when it comes to the experts, those who are actually making decisions, those who hold the cards, I don't want anything to influence outside of their own rubric. And I believe money is a big incentive. Deals and partnerships that may not even be seen can happen on ESPN, and that would influence decisions. So get everybody off of ESPN for good. Another thing that's also bothered me about the CFP, and I was just recently reading a comment before I started recording this on my TikTok, but someone was talking about how it's just not wise to begin a ranking right as the season begins. And they said that they just don't have enough to see, which I can understand that to an extent, but at the same time, I sometimes wonder if they even watched the first 8 games due to some of their rankings and how they already like try to assess why they put a certain team above another team, why they have dropped a team super low, why they brought a team super high. And I just don't like seeing, for example, I saw this back in 2021, and I understand a lot of people don't think of Cincinnati as like a true super dog to win a championship, but it felt weird how I watched Cincinnati basically demolish my Notre Dame Fighting Irish in South Bend, and they were having one heck of a season. They got to #1 in the AP polls, and then that first CFP comes out and they dropped to something like 7 or 6, which I was like, are you for real? Why would you drop them that far? They have been playing impressive, and they've beaten pretty good opponents as well. So I didn't understand that one bit. And so I would love, and this is my next change I would make, let's start the year off unranked. Everybody unranked. The first game, I don't want to see a ranking next to anybody's team. I just think that it would be interesting to see how the CFP would immediately move the domino pieces right after week 1. And that's when they would have their first ranking, that Tuesday after the first week of the college football season, with the little experience, with the little showing that they have of all the teams that have played in week 1 and week 0. I want them to make their decision immediately, and I want them to start thinking right off the bat. I don't want them to wait around and have to make all these decisions where there's a lot of time that goes in between week 1 and whenever the first CFP ranking comes out, and then something that we don't see, that we don't at all comprehend, goes into their thinking process that is unrelated to their rubric and how they grade, and all of a sudden you see a completely different ranking from the AP polls. And then as we get closer to that final ranking, you're seeing them make these like claims that are just so outrageous. I'm about to mention Alabama's name again because I'm gonna just say it. The reason why I'm picking on Alabama this hard and why I call Alabama frauds is because, let's be honest, I have watched Alabama football for a very long time. I've seen Nick Saban's entire career at Alabama. The first year I started watching college football, Alabama beat Texas in the national championship. I know the mentality that Alabama used to have. And let me tell you, it was a very scary one. I've seen them play Notre Dame and beat the ever-living crap out of Notre Dame time in and time out. I've seen them go against the best of the best and have competed at high levels, losing every once in a while. I've never really seen them get blown out. I've seen some games where they've gotten beaten pretty bad, but never really a true masterclass of getting butts whooped. And then here comes this new guy, De Boer. He loses by 21 to Georgia, and then 2 games later loses by 35 to Indiana. This is not the Alabama mentality that I'm used to seeing. I remember the game against Vanderbilt in his first year, and number 13 throwing a hissy fit after realizing they were going to lose to Vanderbilt. You're not going to see that on a Nick Saban team, because the moment it happens, you're kicked off the team, you're suspended. There is a standard that is at Alabama that Nick Saban put that's not been set by De Boer, and that right there should tell you everything. I don't believe Alabama has a national championship mentality like it used to. That's why I call them frauds. And those 2 out of 3 games when, yeah, they got that win over Oklahoma, but getting killed by Georgia and then getting killed by Indiana, does that really seem like Nick Saban football to you? And then everybody's like, what about Notre Dame? And I'm like, I've seen that mentality of a loser. It's called Brian Kelly. Doing great against all of the mid teams, and then immediately you play a super giant, you get your butt whooped. I know what that feels like, and that's why I love Marcus Freeman. I love this new Notre Dame team, because that mentality has switched. Yeah, we still lose to the big teams, but not as bad as we used to. We're getting better, we're being more competitive, we're going into tougher environments, we're starting the year off tough. I mean, we had to go to Columbus a couple years ago in Marcus Freeman's first year, A&M, and then at Miami. I mean, we are starting the year off tough, and you got all these other teams that are starting off with small FCS schools. It's like everybody thinks that Notre Dame is still the same as it was under Brian Kelly. It's like, no, if you've paid attention, you know that there is a shift in Notre Dame's mentality, and that's the same thing that's going on with Alabama, but in the reverse. That's why I call them frauds. And that's why I keep mentioning them, because I don't understand how the CFP keeps thinking this is the same Alabama team. It's just not. Yeah, they're talented, but they don't have a winner's mentality, and that proved against Indiana. I remember watching that game, I was like, yeah, this should confirm it. This should confirm it to everybody that this isn't the same Alabama team. So yeah, I want to see what they think immediately. I want to see their opinions right off the bat. Sometimes we don't know what they think, and they get to their first ranking, and then it's so outlandish, so crazy, and you're just like, okay, what are they thinking in comparison to the AP polls? I just don't know. I want to know what they think immediately. So make every single team unranked, and then right afterwards, rank them, CFP. I want to know what you think throughout the entire year. And then when I get to that final week, I'm not going to be shocked, or I will be, because you pull off something extremely stupid like you did last year. That's one way to think about it. And then there's one more thing I want to change, and that is conference championships. Yeah, Alabama, I'm not done with you yet. I will have to be the first to admit that I think that conference championships are starting to become a joke. Not because I don't believe that they shouldn't matter. I think that you should still have conference championships, or you don't, because you don't know how to rate them properly. You keep saying, well, it should matter that a team got to the conference championships, but then you'll base each result different. One team will fall, another won't. Or in the case of Alabama, they're the only one that doesn't fall after losing badly. But BYU loses in similar manner and drops a spot. And then that has Notre Dame and Miami rubbing up against each other. I might have a tinfoil hat here somewhere, just saying. That should ultimately tell you what I'm about to say. We're going to have to switch conference championships. The first thing I want to do is talk about that the 2 teams that make a conference championship should be based off conference record, overall record, and ranking. We don't always do it based off ranking, which I think is a problem. And there's one conference that I think is stupid when it comes to this, and that's the ACC. I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm not happy for Duke. I mean, they proved me wrong. I thought Virginia was going to win that easily, and they won. They won the conference. That was great. But they were 7-5. Miami, number 12, had the same record. But because of some 5-team tiebreaker, Duke somehow got the nod over Miami, and that ultimately left the conversation for drama between Miami and Notre Dame, and that was a problem. And that's where this whole entertainment part of the business comes in that a lot of people just simply do not like. If I were the ACC commissioner, I would have made it Miami-Virginia. Miami and Duke have the same record in conference, at least, not the same record overall. And then when it comes to the ranking, Miami, of course, is ranked. Duke isn't. Miami wins straight up two of the 3 rubrics that I have for who should make a conference championship, and then they would play Virginia. Miami would have easily beaten Virginia. There's no question about that. Miami would have trounced them. Based on how they played throughout the playoffs, they would have easily gone to town. Miami would have made the number 10 or number 9 spot. Notre Dame would have been at 11, but there would have been only one auto bid. which means that Notre Dame would have gotten the number 11 spot based off the final rankings, and then Tulane would have gotten number 12. Notre Dame would have played Ole Miss, and we wouldn't be having this discussion. But of course, the ACC spent more time trying to promote Miami. Notre Dame didn't really spend that much time trying to promote their own ACC championship game because they knew they already made a mistake. And that is where I would have pulled the pivot. And that's just the first part. 2 teams based on conference record, overall record, and rankings. Simple as that. The 2 best teams possible in your conference championship. And Alabama would have not been in that conference championship. You would have had maybe, well, I guess I would have to look back to Alabama's SEC record. That might be a little different, and that might have just given them the nod, and that works too. But then you would also have to look at the whole idea behind they made the conference championship. They shouldn't be penalized off of that. But then we're also wanting competition. We don't want teams to tank in conference championships. And that's what I was saying. I was saying, well, did Alabama tank? And that's why they weren't dropped? Because if that's the case, then why do we even have an SEC championship game if you're not even going to try to win it? But a lot of people know that Alabama did not tank. They just got killed, and they did not look like a playoff team. This is what I would propose. It depends on how you lose the conference championship game. If you lose by less than 10 points, you shouldn't drop. You competed, you did very well, you shouldn't drop a spot. That's where everybody's like, well, they made the conference championship. They shouldn't be penalized based off that. They made the conference championship. I'm like, okay, cool. If you lose in between 11 points to 20 points, you should drop 1 spot. If you lose by 21 to 30 points, you should drop 2 spots. And if you lose by more than that, you should drop 3 spots. Based on how bad you lose, you should drop some bit. Competition has to matter as much as making the conference championship game. And under that prefix, it would have been Miami at 9, and Notre Dame at 10, and Alabama would have been the team that missed out because they lost by 21. So then that has me thinking, well, let's say we were to do this all over. We had the 16-team format with no auto bids and no bye weeks, and then you also have the conference championship rules. Well, then off of that, what would the playoffs look like? Which is very interesting to think about. First of all, Indiana, Ohio State, Georgia, and Texas Tech, I believe, would have all stayed in their similar spots. Ohio State wouldn't have dropped far. They only lost by a field goal to Indiana. And then 5 through 8 would probably be the same. Oregon, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and Oklahoma. Number 9 would have most likely been Miami. Number 10 would have been Notre Dame. 11 would have been Alabama. 12 would have been BYU. 13 would have been Texas. 14 would have been Vanderbilt. 15 would have been Utah. And number 16 would have been USC. Based off all of those ranking rubrics, you would have had a much more competitive playoffs with less biasy or less controversy with the auto bids. Every team, even Alabama, would have made the playoffs, and it would have been a lot better that way. But because we want to put in all these rules to push stories, it ends up looking like a complete catastrophe. And it questions the whole motive behind the CFP. Switch to the BCS or follow this system and try to get the most out of everything. The 16-team playoffs, the no auto bid rule, no bye weeks. Hey, teams would have probably done a lot better. We probably would have still seen Indiana win the championship, but hey, it could have been a lot more different. Maybe Miami gets there as well, but who knows? All I'm trying to say is that you want to create a framework that if people are going to make decisions, get the money out of the way, get any sort of partnership or biasy out of the way, make good decisions. I want to see what you guys think, and I want to see them early. I just want to see a system that is better for just the whole college football landscape. Really put the 16 teams in, really just put the 16 best teams in and let that be it. You can still do all the things with the rules, but any form of pattern or biasy that pulls teams out, that pulls teams in that don't belong there, rip it out. Get rid of all of that. And of course, go back to that simple method, just go back to the computer system if you can't do that. But that is my overall opinion, and I want to know what you think about it. And that'll do it for today's episode. I'm sorry if the episode feels a little janky. This is a little bit of a hard one to kind of organize and put together. Really, I'm just going off script, talking a lot about what I want to see in the CFP. I want to see a better system. I want to see a more legit system than one that is more pivoted towards storytelling and making all these crazy things happen, which never do. And that's just the whole goal of this. But that concludes my 2 episodes, one talking about Notre Dame, the other talking about the CFP as a whole. And I want to thank you guys so much for all the early support for season 4. I thank you guys so much for all the interactions. And I've been talking a lot. I realized that I get more views on YouTube Shorts, the more interactions on TikTok. So to all the people on TikTok, thank you guys so much for interacting with me there, and hopefully I can do more interactions there as well. It's also inspired some of the way I was thinking in this episode. So thank you guys. And if you haven't already, go follow all my social medias, including TikTok, which are in the description below. But if you enjoyed today's video, please leave a like, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. And I will see you all in the next one. I believe the next one we're going to be simply looking over what's going on in free agency in the NFL so far. It's not going to be like something super set up and everything. We're just going to kind of scroll through ESPN and see what's going on. I'll see you guys then. Hope you guys have a great day. Take care, and goodbye.